From the News Channel 5 Network, this is MorningLine.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on MorningLine. Nick Barris here on a Tuesday, and we've got a good show on tap for you. I'll tell you what, we're going to open up the phone lines, and I don't know if you were someone at home yesterday watching the first presidential debate. Maybe you didn't care. You were watching Monday Night Football. You flipped around, and I understand some didn't, but over 100 million did, they think. And certainly it's going to have a role in how things go with undecideds and what you thought of the two candidates last night. I watched it, and so we thought we would talk a bit about that today, and I am interested to know, at least among our viewers and those folks here in Middle Tennessee, and we have quite a large audience here on MorningLine that join us. We go into some 500,000 homes. Let us know how you think things went, and we'll open up the phone lines, but we're going to talk about that this morning with Professor John Weil from over at MTSU. It's good to have you on, sir.
Good to be here.
Always a pleasure. Political science, it's something you deal with, and I figure you and I will have our thoughts, and like I said, we'll open up the phone lines, but just in case for those of you who maybe didn't get to see it, or want a refresher on what you did see last night, we've got a piece that was filed by CBS News, and we thought we would just roll that, giving you a little bit of overview of some of the things that were said, the high points, the low points, whatever, and then we'll get into our discussion, and then I do want to hear from some of you to tell us how you think the candidates did. Let's have a look at that piece.
The nominees for president made their case to voters Monday night in the first debate of the general election. It didn't take long for attacks to fly.
I have a feeling that by the end of this evening, I'm going to be blamed for everything that's ever happened.
Why not?
Why not? Yeah, why not?
Trump deflected a question that has long dogged his campaign by bringing up an issue that has dogged Clinton's campaign for even longer.
I will release my tax returns against my lawyer's wishes when she releases her 33,000 emails that have been deleted.
I think you've just seen another example of bait and switch here.
And bragged about once not paying taxes.
He didn't pay any federal income tax. So
that makes me smart.
Clinton, meanwhile, sought to call out Trump on his shifting positions on military intervention.
Donald supported the invasion of Iraq.
Wrong.
That is absolutely
wrong.
Proved over and over again.
Wrong.
He actually advocated for the actions we took in Libya and urged that Gaddafi be taken out after actually doing some business with him one time.
Both candidates also butted heads over race relations and law enforcement.
Everyone should be respected by the law, and everyone should respect the law. Right now, that's not the case in a lot of our neighborhoods.
Now, whether or not in a place like Chicago you do stop and frisk, which worked very well, but you take the gun away from criminals that shouldn't be having it.
In Hempstead, New York, I'm Steve Nannis reporting.
All right, those were just a few moments from the hour-and-a-half debate that was hosted by Lester Holt of NBC. And, we'll open up the phone lines and get to it, but I wanted to get your take first, John. And, so much of the debate, seeing the candidates face-to-face is aesthetic. First things, when things begin, you're wondering what they're going to walk out wearing. And as you said before the show, everything was calculated. Clearly, they discussed what Hillary was going to wear and the color, and I imagine the same thing with Donald, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, and I thought they both looked sharp, the red and the blue, but they flip-flopped them, didn't they?
They did. The Republicans are supposed to be the red states.
Well, they looked good. All right. Now, as far as the way things played out, give me some of your analysis, what your takeaway from this is, and what I try to do when I watch this. We all have who we're leaning to politically or whatever. I try to be as impartial as I possibly can, and just based on my knowledge of what a good debate is, determining who I think did better. And I don't know if people can separate. There are some folks, no matter how someone does, they're going to think they did great. Okay, I try to separate it besides, and I've had it in the past where I've had candidates I supported, and I acknowledged that they disappointed me during that debate. Well, I wonder how this went here.
I'm going to say a good example, if you remember in the last election, in the very first debate with Mitt Romney against Obama, there was pretty general consensus that Romney won, even among, even Obama supporters were saying,
he wasn't forceful enough.
That's right.
That's right.
You got to get your A game on. I think the balance of this, I think initially it was fairly balanced. I think as it wore on, Clinton probably showed a bit more dominance. in terms of, personal mannerisms can be important, as our own Al Gore found out.
Yes.
There weren't so many signs last night, but I think there were a number of times where both candidates interrupted occasionally. Trump did it a little bit more than she did. And there's a little bit of the gentleman in me that says when a woman is talking, you got to be particularly careful about, not jumping in. But there was pretty good clash, I think, on the issues. I don't think that if someone went in with a fairly positive view of one or the other, or a negative view, that it was likely to change.
They did talk about a ton of still, which I find this hard to believe, as different as these two candidates are, that there are still millions of Americans undecided between these two. I mean, I want to meet some of these truly undecided. I mean, I just don't get it. What kind of person at this point is still completely undecided between these two candidates, as different as they are? But I wonder if that debate is going to be an influence on any of them.
Well, more probably than the next two. I mean, I think of the three presidential debates, this is the one that's likely to get the biggest audience. And I will say, I'm not sure that either candidate made a, often what you get at the end of a debate is one big gaffe that everybody sort of identifies. Yeah. And there were a lot of statements that were made that one could question the accuracy of them, but I'm not sure that there was any. I think probably the best line of the night was Clinton's response to, being low energy and staying at home with well, I'm prepared for the debate just as I'm prepared to be the president. It's possible that Trump's line about not paying taxes because I'm a smart person might stick in the crawl of the middle class, people who are paying their taxes and, don't want to feel like chumps because they're doing what they think is the right thing. But I don't think there was one of these aha moments that 20 years from now everybody's going to be pointing to and saying that was a mistake that finally sunk, one or the other ships.
Yeah, that's sometimes what you look at, is that they say that debates may not, based on your performance, win you an election, but they could, if you say have one of the gaffes you just described, right, which I agree with you. I didn't think there was one really last night. It can lose you an election if you really come off poorly on something.
There was a really obvious one in the debate involving Gerald Ford, where he claimed that there were no Soviet troops in Poland, and there was what you're commander in chief and you don't know this. But I don't think unless something comes up that we all missed last night, I don't think there was one of those moments.
Now, it was interesting this morning. I tried to do as best research as I could. We're actually doing an online poll here at News Channel 5 based on who you thought wins, and you can vote as many times as you want, which can skew things, and it's unscientific completely. But that's showing based on viewers who I think vote according to who they really like anyway, regardless. And it's 50-50. But I also went online and did a lot of searching among the assessments from pundits. And again, take pundits for what you will. And I'm talking about across the board. And across the board, the general consensus, and this is including many of the commentators at Fox, and I think we know that many of them at Fox maybe skew more conservative. The consensus is that Hillary won. Okay, maybe not an overwhelming slam dunk or something, but I'm just talking about the consensus. I'm not just talking about if someone wants to say, well, Nick, maybe that's CBS because they're liberal, or NBC, or I'm saying across the board, including conservative, if you will, more media outlets, the consensus is that Hillary did better than Trump in this first one. And again, not to the point where, oh, well, that's it for him. No. But and even his own people, after the fact, according to Major Garrett this morning on CBS, said, they have some concerns that they want him to step up a little more, kind of like Obama had to in the second debate. So I don't know if you agree with that, but the consensus out there from those who are trying to be impartial is that Hillary won.
I think that's right. Although, again, I don't think it changed many minds of the people who already had their minds made up. I do sometimes, to go back to the earlier question you asked, who are the undecideds? I sometimes wonder if some of them are just people who are so polite that they would rather not engage in argument, and it's easier to say, well, I'm keeping an open mind, I really haven't decided. It's the old question that political scientists used to face with, how many people are Republicans and Democrats and how many are truly independent? And you would ask somebody, well, what's your party position? Well, I'm an independent. well, who did you vote for last year? Well, the Republican. Well, who did you vote for, you know, the year before that? Well, the Republicans. And you go back, and for 30 years they've been voting Republican, but they still consider themselves to be independent. And of course, you had the same thing on the Democratic side.
Sure.
So sometimes independents are not quite as independent as they might sound.
I do wonder, too, if some of them that are undecided are those that maybe have such a distaste for both candidates that what's undecided for them is whether they vote or don't vote. Meaning that did they hear anything from either one of the two that might draw them to the polls to vote for one of the other, or they choose not. And by the way, I mean, even if you don't like either of these candidates and don't want to vote for them, you can still go and should go to vote in many of the other races.
Right.
But I do believe there are going to be people that, for whatever reason, choose either not to vote for either one of these two or write someone else in. And maybe those are the undecideds. Like, I can't decide if I want to vote or not, not whether I want to vote for one or the other.
And one thing we do need to remember about the stage last night is not every candidate was on.
Yeah.
And in my judgment, it made for a much better clash between the two candidates. I actually think it was one of the better, you know, compared to most of the primary debates. I came out thinking, you know, both of them really did have a chance sort of to ask questions of one another. And I thought Holt did a pretty good job through most of it of sort of, you know, once he'd asked the initial question or two in each area,
kind of stayed out of it.
letting them go at it. And I think that would have been a little harder to do if you had one or the other of the third-party candidates.
Yep, that's true. And also, I read something. I think it's true that neither of the campaigns signed agreements for the ground rules, really, on this. They knew the format, what it was going to be, but there was not something that agreed to complete structure, which I think meant that Lester had to allow them to kind of go free reign, which meant, of course, they fell behind a bit.
Well, and of course, you know, that's the original Lincoln-Douglas, you know, to the extent we think. I mean, you can go back to 60, which is the first presidential debates, or you can go back to Lincoln-Douglas, and of course there you would have like an hour speech followed by, or an hour and a half speech followed by, or an hour speech and an hour and a half rebuttal and then a half an hour response, and some of them would be, you know, half day or all day affairs.
Yeah. All right, well, listen, we'll take a break. When we come back, some phone calls coming in. The call that I would be very interested to hear from, because I suspect we'll hear from supporters of both candidates saying they think they won, okay? And that's fine if you believe that. We want to hear that. But I'd be very curious to hear from either a Trump or Clinton supporter who calls in and says that after what they saw last night, they were actually disappointed in their candidate's performance. I don't think we'll get one of those calls. But if you are someone who, you know, was like, gosh, I wish he had done better, I wish she had done better, I'd be very curious to hear from that if it's one, because I think it's very easy. I think people who support either one of these candidates are going to call in and say, regardless of how they did, they think they won. And if that's the case, you know, you can acknowledge that someone didn't do well and still vote for them. But what drives me crazy is sometimes when people it's obvious in some instances when either one of these two candidates make a gaffe and they just choose to ignore it. Well, you know, that's the way voters are these days.
There are a lot of skills for being president that do not involve being the best debater.
Yeah. Let's take a break. Yeah, of course. Exactly. This is just part of the puzzle, folks. We'll take a break. We'll be back with your phone calls and more of our conversation, as well as a preview of what the formats will be for the next two debates right after this.